Hello, I'm John Michael Chambers. This is a special broadcast at jmcbroadcasting.com. And joining me today to get us up to date on very important matters concerning your freedom and mine is Loy Brunson to provide us an update on the famous Brunson brothers case before the Supreme Court. There are two new nuggets for us to stay on track with this, and also to have Loy weigh in on other events that are occurring. Loy Brunson, with his trumpet-playing brothers, appeared on over 30 national TV shows, including appearances with Johnny Carson and President Ronald Reagan. Loy made U.S. Supreme Court history. Big story, folks, and a lot of us know about this, but there's a lot of new people coming aboard. So Loy will lay a groundwork for you folks, but Loy made a U.S. Supreme Court history with the first emergency damage claim against members of Congress their appeal ever filed by SCOTUS from someone representing themselves without lawyers. Loy's federal lawsuit against Joe Biden and 386 other members of Congress is considered to be the most powerful case ever brought to the Supreme Court. Loy is also the author of a pocket-sized and coffee table-sized Constitution book that is the first to show the power clause that defines and prohibits socialism and much more. Also, for those, again, newly aboard that haven't been following our work, when you go to jmcbroadcasting.com and/or our Rumble channel, you will find Conversations of Consequence, a special program, a monthly I do, where I feature the important voices of our time, and you get to learn about these individuals, their childhood, their upbringing, and what brought them to where they are today. You'll find that fascinating if you go in the archives. Loy Brunson and I did that in 2025. All right, well, thank you very much, Loy, for being here. This is a special broadcast. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great. Thank you. Just getting over a little bit of a cough, but other than that, doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Thank you for your time. And all right, so listen, again, for those newly coming aboard, Loy, if you will, please explain the premise of your case and why this is unprecedented and historic.
Okay, first of all, it's a case that's been supported by President Trump on his Truth Social account when it reached the Supreme Court. And it's all about the 2020 election, where Ted Cruz was able to gather about 145 supporters in Congress to encourage a 10-day pause for a simple 10-day investigation. And what was that about? Well, that was about the electoral votes coming in, and they're supposed to be counted. And Ted Cruz says, wait, we have a mountain of evidence proving clearly that we have been attacked. And we need to investigate that evidence before we open the envelopes and count the ballots. So with 145 members of Congress, House and Senate, that's all the support he got. So my brothers and I got together, and one of my brothers, not being a lawyer, but knowing how to act as a paralegal, and his own representing himself, was able to put together a personal damage claim lawsuit against the 387 defendants that include Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Mike Pence, and 384 others. And so it was filed and then unfiled by the court. See, we're supposed to go to an attorney or a law firm to do something like this and then get permission from the government to sue the government. But we thought, no. The Constitution is very clear with the due process protections of being able to sue any entity in any court. So we shouldn't have to go to a special court and with permission from the defendants. So we went ahead and filed in federal court, and they probably had never seen anything like this before. So they filed it, but then they unfiled it. And so we sued the Federal Court of Utah and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals for not allowing it to move forward. And after we sued and showed them the liability that they had created for themselves, they allowed this to move forward. And so March 31st, 2022, the U.S. Marshals Service started serving 387 defendants in Washington, D.C., which included Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Maxine, some pretty significant names. And so that turned into a bit of a battle where they then filed it and filed it again and said that it was deficient. And then that's when the court proceedings happened, where we sued two federal courts. And then after that, they turned it around and let it to go forward. And then the Supreme Court filed it under their Rule 11, which is significant because if they file something under Rule 11, it means you have been able to bypass the the normally required last court, in this case, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So they allowed me to bypass that and file it Rule 11. So I would say this is probably the only Rule 11 personal damage claim lawsuit ever filed against members of government in the history of the court.
That's extraordinary and monumental. And boy, you really have to know how to navigate the minefield of rules and laws to get to where you have arrived. So hats off to you and your brothers. And to those just learning about that, you heard it right. What's the number? 386 congressmen and women?
387 defendants, including Mike Pence and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big story. No wonder it ran into some obstacles and opposition. But the case, correct me on this language, Loy. I think I don't have it exactly right, but I'm in the vicinity of truth. So the case is not, because there's some narratives buried out there that the case is dead, it's not going anywhere, and it's been basically removed from the possibilities. Can you set the record straight on that, sir?
Well, there's some special characteristics of this case. First of all, the Supreme Court is supreme. They decide what they want to do. Normally you're entitled to two petitions to get a conference. Then they decide if there's going to be a hearing. So I had one conference, then I filed for another conference, and the docket showed distributed, but it didn't say distributed for conference because, well, the justices were on vacation. It was August. I think it was August 19th, 2023. President Trump retruthed a video encouraging people to go to loybrunson.com and they could digitally get a letter written to the Supreme Court with copies to me. So about 100,000 people have done that.
Yes.
And so when you're denied a hearing, it's usually considered it's over with, right? So you file a petition for rehearing, which is really a petition for a second conference, which we did, me being the plaintiff, me being the petitioner. And on Friday, President Truth supported the letter campaign. And then on that following Monday, August 21st, I believe it was, where the Supreme Court justices were on vacation, right after the next business day that President Trump supports the case and supports the letter campaign, that following Monday, what happens? The docket shows denied a hearing, even without a conference.
Wow.
So we thought, okay, this is one of the many brick walls we hit and tried to overcome. That's after the federal court and filed my case more than once. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals supported that. We sued the federal courts. And then after we sued them, even though they won, they decided to do what I sued them to do, which is pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. And they allowed it to move forward. So now there's something, and some people know about this. We have a very special U.S. Solicitor General. At the time my case was filed and made it to the Supreme Court, the Solicitor General was a left-wing, I believe Biden appointed Solicitor General. Now the Solicitor General has jurisdiction over the case, and they defend the defendants. But their job is not to just simply defend the defendants. They need to bring justice to the court. So history shows, Supreme Court's history shows, the Solicitor Generals have actually been in favor of the plaintiffs because they're supposed to bring truth and justice to the court and not be prejudiced one way or another. So the Solicitor General has an incredible amount of power, and his name is Mr. Dean John Sauer, appointed by President Trump. So now that President Trump understands this, and I'm sure President Trump would not have supported this case twice if he hadn't got expert advice from Mr. Sauer, who is now the U.S. Solicitor General. So the U.S. Solicitor General, with a little or without encouragement from President Trump, could easily get me my second conference that I didn't get, even though it's been on the shelf and denied once. It's on the shelf, and they have the power to say, hey, lower courts, we're gonna give this guy a second conference. Over 100,000 people have written letters. They deserve a hearing on this. And the case really is about the oath of office. It's a twofold. One purpose, that the reason that I agreed to become the plaintiff, is the education side of this. The Congress have given themselves immunity, ultimate, absolute immunity, they call it. And so that's one of the challenges with the lawsuits, saying you can't have absolute immunity. Why? Because Article 6 of the Constitution that you've sworn to uphold and defend and obey, basically, is very clear with the words, they shall be bound by oath to this Constitution. So absolute immunity legislation that they've given themselves conflicts with that.
Wow.
So it's about public awareness. And Thomas Jefferson said the only true corrective for constitutional abuse is education. Well, what education? It's the best education is showing the public, which this lawsuit does, which I'm doing with my books, is showing clauses in the Constitution that have been hidden and I think intentionally been misinterpreted and hidden and forgotten. And so that's one of the exciting aspects of this that was the reason for me getting involved. Then, of course, if the Supreme Court grants a hearing and they remand it back to federal court without claiming anyone's guilty, the lower federal court could actually allow the discovery process. So they would have 20 days to lawyer up and file either an extension or file an answer to the lawsuit. And so I thought, why don't I print up some of the summonses and complaints? So I printed up 500 of these. This is Kamala Harris's summons and complaint. I had it perfect bound and glossed cover. So I have 500 of these. They're available at 7discoveries.com. And I thought also I had a bunch of these printed too, which is an exact copy of what the Supreme Court justices received. They received quite a few because the clerks are supposed to get copies. And it's what they have in their file, I guess you could say library, and they like it to be perfect bound. So it's perfect bound like a book. So that's also available at 7discoveries.com. I thought it would be like an expose on the Constitution to read through this and see all the 387 defendants and see the causes of action and what I'm asking for as relief. So about education. And then, of course, if it's remanded back to federal court, which is the goal, then it'd be discovery. Then we'd find out why over 300 members of Congress refused a 10-day investigation. And we could find out why through discovery, which would be required with it being answered. And it'd be like text messages, phone messages, phone calls, letters, emails, document production, depositions where they would have to testify under oath as to why, if there was any reason why, if they colluded with any other members of Congress for some reason. So that could expose any of the corruption that might have taken place with so many members of Congress refusing a simple 10-day investigation. So it'd be a house cleaning that President Trump could help initiate with the new U.S. Solicitor General. And that could happen at the right time in the right place.
Well, that's a great update, and also debunks the myths that are circulating just in small circles regarding the ability for the case to still move forward. And that's extraordinary work. Thank you on behalf of everybody else in this country for what you and your brothers have put forward and your consistency to overcome the barriers that you've faced. Look at what it takes. I'll talk to my audience for a moment. Look at what it takes, folks, for we the people's voices to actually be heard. Look at what one has to go through just to get our voices heard squarely and fairly per the Constitution. And this is not a small issue. I mean, this is the war we're fighting. Our country, and I don't mind saying this, our country was stolen through election theft and election fraud, foreign and domestic. Our DNI is releasing that. Kash Patel, we knew that years ago, of course, but now it is officially official. And let's hope that this case gets that next move. And with the president's
well, if I may
support,
mention just one
sure.
more, could I mention one more thing about this? The Chief Justice of the Federal Court of Utah, who was a supervisory judge over my case, happened to be a Democrat appointed by Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he was my justice, there were other justices that would look at this. So we showed him and the court that unfiling my case was beyond their purview, beyond their responsibility, out of their umbrella of protection. That's an administrative action that they took. And the U.S. attorneys in defending the case actually quoted a case where a judge was sued. But we looked up the case and found out that the case they quoted, the judge lost. Now, how can a judge lose if he's claiming judicial immunity? He lost because he acted outside of the judicial jurisdiction and acted in an administrative way. So it's pretty interesting that even though we had a Democrat judge, of course, we're suing Democrats and Republicans, that it was that they got together and made the right decision. I think it was because we took them to court that they realized that they had created a tremendous amount of liability on the court and with the justice. So they changed their decision and ordered the chief clerk of the court to issue the 387 summonses after it had been called back in and filed. They ordered it to move forward. And so I
Yeah,
thought
well,
that's kind of an interesting point there, where we're able to keep fighting. We hit so many brick walls,
yes.
but we kept at it and were prayerful about it, and this was allowed to move forward.
Excellent. That's great, great update, and brings a whole new meaning to political activism, legislating from the bench. Not supposed to be happening. Well, anyway, let's talk about what makes your constitutional handbook and now table book different from the ones that have been circulated for years. Let's say from National Center for Constitutional Studies, the handbook of the Constitution. What differentiates yours from that, and how could it be differentiated if it's the Constitution?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. As a matter of fact, when I started making these discoveries, I met with the owner of the National Center for Constitutional Studies, and I said, I've found things that are not only relevant, but really powerful and almost revolutionary in the Constitution. And so I shared them with him for a half hour, and he says, I've never heard of this before. So could you please print them out and send them to us, and we will send it as a companion copy to our Constitution
Nice.
books. And I says, well, why don't we come up with a Constitution book and just incorporate it in it? And he says, we can't do that because that would be considered political, and it's going into schools and government agencies, and they can't do that. So later I thought, well, why don't I just create my own Constitution book? And so I put my discoveries, I call it 7 discoveries, and I encourage people to find their own discoveries along with these, and I'll share a couple of them with you. Like a story. So when I this was like 2012, some of my first copies, I thought I need to test this to see if the public will be receptive to this pretty ostentatious claim, I guess you could say, sort of, and quite a challenge for people maybe to even listen to the message. So a friend of mine allowed me to stand in front of his table at a trade show, and I would stop people as they walked past, and I would hold up my little book, and I'd say, I've discovered some things in the Constitution that I believe have never been published or publicized before. May I share them with you? And I remember my best story is this man took out his NCCS Constitution with George Washington's picture on it, and I saw it was tattered. This guy had really used it as a reference tool, right? And he kind of shook it at me. He says, you think you can tell me something that I don't already know in this? And I says, yes, I think I can. Will you give me a try? He says, if you can, I'll make a contribution and I'll take one of your books. I says, okay, great. I says, well, first of all, the first Congress did not define the first 10 amendments as the Bill of Rights. They defined the first 10 amendments as further declaratory and restrictive clauses to the Constitution. And I said, I have found, amongst other things, I have found that there's an interpretation clause in the Constitution that demands strict interpretation, that the only constitutional and legal lawful way for anyone to interpret the Constitution, especially government officials, the only lawful way for them to interpret the document is in a way that protects our God-given unalienable rights, unalienable key word here. I said, so when I found this, it's just one sentence. It's in one of those 10 declaratory restrictive clauses. And I said, to me, it was like a revelation, like this is actually word for word what the Lord inspired one of the signers to put in it. And to me, it was like the 11th commandment. And it goes like this. You're familiar with it. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, the Constitution cannot be interpreted any way that would compromise or disparage or deprive the unalienable rights of we, the people. And so I said that to him, and he reached in his pocket and pulled out his wallet, handed me a 20, took a book, and walked away. I thought, wow, this is it. People will be receptive to the message.
Yes.
Another one of the discoveries in my book is there's a clause that clearly defines socialism and clearly prohibits it. Now, there are few prohibition clauses in the Constitution, but it's there. And it's the last line of the 5th Amendment. Nor shall your private property, which includes your money, be taken for public use without just compensation.
Oh, boy.
Well, that's the definition of taxation, too. So that opens up a ton of questions that are answered in my book and shows how incredible the Constitution has been ignored and misunderstood and hidden these clauses are hidden, how wonderful it is in providing us a system of government that we're far from at this point, and one of them being, a binding oath. That's so simple. When I started making these discoveries, I had a camera. My brother was a camera guy, went with me, and my first interview was Mike Lee. He was running for U.S. Senate for the first time, and I said, hey, Article 6 is very clear with the words, you shall be bound by oath to this Constitution. So when you become a U.S. Senator, you take an oath, and you're supposed to be bound by that oath. So what's the penalty if you break your oath? If there's no penalty, then it's not a binding oath. So I said, what's the penalty? And it made him think out loud for about 45 seconds or longer. It was an unbelievable experience. He first said, well, you lose the election. And then he thought, no, that can't be it. And so he finally concluded that everyone in Congress, really, with his words, are not taking a binding oath. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe we should make our public officials aware and have them take a clause from a tax return and add that to their oath, where under penalties of perjury, they swear to uphold or affirm to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. So they better read it, because if they don't read it or don't intend to, then there could be perjury charges brought against them. So the accountability problem is to me, it's the Achilles heel. It is. So we're shooting at the armor, constantly shooting at the armor, and there's an Achilles heel, and it's the oath of office. It's what Thomas Jefferson said, education, and that education is just becoming aware of these power clauses. That this great book, brag about my own book here, but this great coffee table book here that highlights those clauses, so you don't have to spend years like I did trying to find and understand them. There's Q&A in the back. There's the 10 Commandments. There's the Congressional Oath in here, because the Congressional Oath is not in the Constitution, but it's in here with the 10 Commandments on the back, and the Q&A and quotes from modern politicians and people and other people that were for socialism. So it's a great way to help save the Constitution, one coffee table at a time, I say.
Yeah.
So, and people can go to 7discoveries.com and get that. And then also I was able to get 50,000 of my pocket-sized Constitution book that has, well, the fun thing about this coffee table is it has gold foil, and it has a nice picture on the back of the commander-in-chief. It's his number one responsibility is to defend the Constitution. And then so I have some pocket-sized versions of that, which also have it's a soft touch leather feel, and it also has the gold foil with this picture. And then I also have mine. It's not quite as fancy with my picture in the back. And so people can get 38 of these for, I call it the 38 special, for $38, and that includes free priority mail shipping. These were going for $15 each, but I got a great deal on a bunch of them. So people can go in if they want 38 of those for $38 with free priority mail shipping. They can do that. So I'm on the warpath for education.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people don't realize that there is an education clause in Article 1, Section 8. There's an enumerated power. I call it the militia clause. It's the education militia, where it gives the Congress the power to raise money to discipline the militia, which is education. Discipline is education. And militia should be every able-bodied person that wants to join. They can have a funded education. For what purpose? It says right there, it says, for the purpose of enforcing the laws of the Union. Well, that's, in other words, for enforcing the Constitution of the United States, because that's the laws of the Union. So the Congress has the power to fund all of our constitutional education and also arm us, because it says arm and discipline the militia for the what purpose? For the enforcing the Constitution of the United States. So that's why we're off track, is because Congress never did that. That should have been part of the educational system. And it's really the only educational program that's enumerated within Article 1, Section 8 is a constitutional education that is very clear right there that could be funded.
To our viewers, President Trump is standing behind this, as publicly stated twice per Lloyd just now on his Truth Social platform, and with the appointment of that Solicitor Attorney General, if that's the proper title, is very encouraging. So from a 40,000-foot view, folks, we have this monumental, unprecedented case against the 387 people. I won't accuse him of what their violations are. We'll let the lawsuit work its way through. But that's got to make you feel good, folks. And I would assume that it costs some money for you and your brothers to get through this process, even though you didn't, quote, hire a stack of lawyers. So two things here, sevendiscoveries.com, pick up a copy of any one of those versions of the book. And for those with means and that have tentacles that spread far and wide, pick up bundles because again, I would assume you and your brothers have come out of pocket quite a bit on this. Would that be an accurate statement? Getting all these filings?
Yes,
These
it was
cases?
all out of pocket. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Every
Yeah.
day, the three of us were working on it every day to make sure it was right. And one of my brothers even filed an identical lawsuit, which was brilliant because he was bold enough to actually visit with the U.S. attorneys, and they were completely open with him. They had nothing to lose, and they gave him information that helped a lot too. So we actually received from help from the judges of the federal court and the U.S. attorneys and being honest with us and giving us information, and right up to the Supreme Court filing with the clerk of the court. So it's been one miracle after another. We just there was a lot of discouragement. A lot of people think, "Oh, what are you doing? It's crazy." And it's funny because when I received the phone call first, it was like a month after the joint session. My brother called me and says, "Hey, Loy, I have a great idea." I says, "What is it?" Well, he says, "I know how to sue." And I watched the joint session, and I'm really, really disappointed in over 300 members of Congress that didn't support a 10-day investigation. So I've decided to bring a lawsuit against them. I said, "Well, that sounds wonderful." And he says, "But the good thing about this is you get to be the plaintiff." I said, "Oh, wow, really? I'm going to put my head on the chopping block. Huh? I become the target." But I was so excited to hear the opportunity because I was trying to figure out a way to get my information out with my Constitution books. And it was just little groups. So I thought this was a great way to get the U.S. attorneys to read these concepts, to get the judges to read some of these concepts that we incorporate into the lawsuit. And it's just been a miracle. It's been a battle, but it's been a miracle.
Yeah, all you need is the president's support, and you've got that. And I don't think he's finished supporting you behind the scenes, in my humble opinion. And we'll see how this plays out. But in addition to the president, General Flynn has also spoken about your work and your lawsuit and your constitutional booklets, and has been very supportive of your efforts as well. Well, listen,
Yeah,
folks.
he purchased 500 of the coffee table and gave them to attendees at his December 16th event at Mar-a-Lago. And he invited me to be there too, which I attended, and invited me to participate. So and then he told me, he says, "I've read the whole book and I love it." So that was very encouraging.
Very nice. That hardbound big coffee table book is really a nice publication. And I'm talking about, besides what it represents, just the packaging of it. It's very high quality. You can see it even through just a Zoom. Sevendiscoveries.com, folks. When you go to my web, go directly to that website for sure. In addition to that, on my website under the resource guide page, where you'll see official government documents and publications from the administration and other things by the public, like Loy Brunson. You'll see Loy's picture there, and sevendiscoveries.com. You can click there. There's two different sites Loy has. I think I have them both published, and that's just another way for you to access his work and to pick up a copy of these materials. I mentioned this before we hit the record button, Loy. Well, let's just put it on out here. Let's follow up. If I can get the images of those books front and back in PDF or whatever, I want to get them published because they're quite attractive. And most importantly is the contents within. And patriots are looking for, knowledge, right? We've heard it all before. Knowledge, is wisdom, but applied knowledge. Knowledge is power, but applied knowledge is wisdom. So let's get the knowledge and let's all get it applied, and let's continue to follow your case. It's going to be an extraordinary year. Any commentary about the landscape we're in right now into restoring our republic and getting 2020 set straight? 107 sings the song 2020, it ain't over yet, and it isn't over yet, thanks to our DNI, right? Direct National Intelligence. Thanks to Kash Patel. Thanks to the collective work of so many people, including Rudy Giuliani, and your work and your brothers. Talk a little bit about the midterms, coming up, the general elections, and why 2020 has got to be set straight, or you don't have a country, just like our president says.
Well, and I think a lot of people feel the same way, and that is God is in control. And we've seen miracles happen with the preservation of President Trump's life, his kind of a conversion, a born again kind of moment or moments for him.
Yeah.
And so I believe miracles are happening around him. I think things are moving in the right direction to prepare for the Lord's second coming. And I think that there's so many good, righteous people that have been praying and working and campaigning. The Lord's got his eye on us, and he's going to continue to perform miracles. So I'm very positive about the midterms coming up, and I'm hoping I'm involved in some way to help Mike Lindell with his campaign in Minnesota. And he's seen my book, and he wants to get my book with his out to hundreds of thousands of people. And we're working on that plan, and that'll be exciting. And then also I've talked to Steve Hilton a little bit, and we want to make sure he wins in California. But so we just need to get out and do everything we can to make it work. And I think one special thing that I think is happening that happened when President Trump was elected is that there's been some changes and some corrections with the voting process. So I think we have a little more secure opportunity in the midterms. And either way, the Lord's will is gonna happen, and we're gonna prepare for the future, which is pretty bright and exciting.
I agree. It is bright and exciting, and everything you just said is well said. And I'll just contribute to that. Folks, we've heard it before, but it is true. This is really a battle between good and evil, between divinity and demonic world. It starts with God. We have the White Hats, the military, Trump, and people like Loy and everyone listening. We, the people, and collectively, under that hierarchy of command and control, if you will, are going to be victorious. We already know that. We just got to get to the end, the finish line, and we're getting there pretty soon. And thanks to your great work again, sevendiscoveries.com. Before we go, Loy, just want to ask you, again, to our viewers, go watch Conversations of Consequence. You'll find it in the archives on Rumble last year and on my website under Conversations of Consequence, where we featured a song that Loy and I believe your brothers put together that was quite interesting. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? And are there any updates on that song with regards to Ted Nugent?
Oh, is that the 36 trillion parody on the 16 trillion?
That's the
people
one.
can go to YouTube. They can go to my Loy Brunson YouTube account and find that on there. I think it's Trump is made out of mud, ? I think that's what it's called. But several years ago, I just felt like writing a parody, and I liked the 16 tons by Tennessee Ernie Ford. He's the one that made it real famous.
Yeah.
And so it starts out, we call it Trump. Some say Trump is made out of mud. Well, he's a job creating man made of muscle and blood, skin and bone, and a backstrap to tax debt the shareholders own. The shareholders meaning the Federal Reserve System, really. And so 36 trillion, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt, taxes and interest from shore to shore. The Federal Reserve is the company store. So I've got other verses. If you've taken an oath, you had better step aside. A lot of men swore and a lot of men lied. One oath of iron and another of steel. If the left one don't get you, the right one will. So it's about the oath and about the Federal Reserve, and it's about money. In order to really understand these discoveries in the Constitution, we need to understand money, and that when $1 trillion is created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve, it's profit, and it's supposed to be profit for the Treasury, and we're all acting as if it's profit for the Federal Reserve shareholders, and we're allowing them to bill us plus interest. And that is much more difficult to believe than to understand, but that message is getting out there too. So I think the message is, let's overthrow the modern day money changers. And how do we do that? By exposure. So this book exposes that, explains it. John F. Kennedy started doing it. Abraham Lincoln started doing it, and they got stopped. But we have the technologies now where the word can get out in a massive and quick way, and it's going to happen. And when that happens, we're going to see things that are going to blow the socialists away. Socialism, a counterfeit, a counterfeit compared to what we would receive back in reparations. You call it reparations, but we're talking tax refunds. These guys have literally created trillions of dollars of wealth, not just money, but they own trillions of dollars worth of global corporations and assets that really belong to the U.S. Treasury, which should be distributed to the U.S. taxpayer.
And that's exactly what is underway right now with President Donald J. Trump and Scott Bessent, the exposing and dismantling step by step of the fraudulent, illegal, and unconstitutional Federal Reserve and its little cousin, the IRS. This is an extraordinary time to be alive. I'm sure Mr. G. Edward Griffin is quite happy. He had a body of work on that, The Creature of Jekyll Island, and it really is an incredible time to be alive. And I never thought that I would see, as you said, putting to bed the money changers or whatever word you just used. I didn't ever think I'd see that in my lifetime, and it is at the doorstep, folks. Sometime, in my humble opinion, before this present term of President Donald J. Trump concludes. That's how in my crystal ball, as I see it. But it's great. It's a great time to. It's a great time to get educated. So pick up copies of the books. 7discoveries.com. And that song, Lloyd, you listen to some of the lyrics Lloyd just gave you, well written, but when you hear it against that famous melody from Tennessee Williams, whatever his name is, it's good. It's a nice, I don't know if the word is parody or whatever, but it's a nice, it'll inspire you and make you laugh with so much important meaning, with a kind of that goofy country kind of song behind it. It's wonderful. But your rendition of it was very powerful. I haven't heard it since last time we spoke, but it was, so well recorded. It had so much musical impact, and some belting out vocals and so forth. So anyway, I just wanted to get special broadcasts, check in with Loy Brunson from time to time. And I'm sure we'll be talking with you later on this year. Any closing comments, Lloyd, before we sign off?
Oh, sure. About the song, Ted Nugent heard it, and he called me, and he said he wants to turn it into a Ted Nugent hit. So it's a fun song to listen to, and you can find it at the Loy Brunson YouTube. It's a music video.
Yes.
So,
well, Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent is Ted Nugent. He's having a lot of fun these days. He's got his podcast out there, and he's got a loud voice, and his guitar is also a very loud voice. So let's hope he puts his talent to that song and gets it even further established out there. But I encourage everyone to go watch that and listen to that song. It'll brighten you up a bit. And I love your optimism. And it's well founded and well grounded, because this is God's plan. It's God ordained. Trump was anointed, and here we are, and we're going through the minutia from dark to light. But the pendulum has shifted now, finally, in our direction, and we have challenges ahead of us. Make no mistake about it. But we will be victorious. And thank you for keeping your oath to God, if you will, and your oath to our Constitution, and being a citizen, as General Flynn says, local action, national impact. You kind of did it in reverse, and from the bottom up as well. So God bless you, Loy, and your brothers. We thank you on behalf of everyone listening, because your work is extraordinary. And do check back in with us later this year. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, John Chambers. Appreciate you very much, and your audience.
You bet. Thanks a lot. All right, folks. See you next time.
Join JMC Broadcasting's monthly Global Defense War Military Panel. JMC hosts an esteemed panel of military experts, including Ricardo Bosi, Tom Lennox, Chuck Sellers, Michael Jaco, Derek Johnson, Brad Wozny, and other military guests. Join us each month, where this panel of esteemed guests analyze the current events across a broad spectrum of topics, addressing the questions and concerns that you have. Subscribe for free by visiting jmcbroadcasting.com. John looks forward to seeing you at the next episode of the Global Defense War Military Panel broadcast, right here on jmcbroadcasting.com.